"Don't touch that door. This is not your house," she said, loud enough for the entire street to hear, like volume could turn a lie into a fact. The porch light flickered above us, that cheap warm bulb my mom had installed 10 years ago, still humming faintly like it always did. And for a second, I just stood there with my key halfway to the lock, trying to process how a stranger in a hot pink suit was telling me I didn't belong in my own home. The night air smelled like cut grass and asphalt still holding the day's heat, and somewhere down the block a sprinkler ticked back and forth, steady, indifferent, like none of this was happening. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level, because I've learned the hard way that calm sounds stronger than loud. "I live here." She smiled when I said that. Not a normal smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that feels rehearsed. "That's exactly what trespassers say," she replied, already lifting her phone, already dialing before I could take another step. I heard the dispatcher pick up, tinny through the speaker, and she didn't hesitate, didn't ask, didn't verify, didn't even look at me again. "Yes, I need officers," she said, voice suddenly sweet, controlled, professional. "There's a man attempting to break into my property." My grip tightened around my keys. You ever have a moment where everything feels slightly off, like the world shifted half an inch and didn't bother to tell you? That was it. Because behind her, past her shoulder, I could see my front hallway. Same scuffed baseboards. Same narrow console table my mom used to keep her mail on. Same picture frame hanging crooked because I never got around to fixing it. Everything exactly where it should be. Except now I had to prove it was mine. I exhaled slow, tasting that metallic edge of adrenaline creeping in, and stepped back from the door, not because I was wrong, but because I knew exactly how this looked from the outside. Man, nighttime. Key in hand. Angry woman calling 911 first. Narrative matters more than truth in the first 60 seconds. I've seen that play out more times than I can count. "You might want to hang up," I said quietly, more for the record than for her. "Because this isn't going to go the way you think." She laughed at that. Actually laughed, like I just told a joke. "Oh, I think it is," she said, tilting her head slightly, studying me like she was already writing the ending in her head. "This house has been under review. You don't have the authority to be here." Under review. That was the phrase that caught me. Not wrong enough to sound fake. Not right enough to mean anything real. Just enough to confuse people who don't know better. I'd heard versions of it before. In complaints. In reports. In cases that started small and ended with someone losing something they never thought they could lose. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably a work email I'd ignored all evening, but I didn't reach for it. My focus stayed on her, on the way she positioned herself between me and the door, like she'd already decided she had control of the space. The hum of distant sirens started low, then grew louder, cutting through the quiet like a warning. She straightened when she heard them, shoulders pulling back, confidence settling in like a second skin. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't guessing. She was betting on the system reacting before it checked the facts. And for a lot of people, that bet works. I glanced down at my keys again, then at the lock, then back at her. Same door I'd walked through 1,000 times. Same key that had never failed me. Until tonight. "You really believe this is your house?" I asked, not challenging, just measuring. Her eyes didn't flicker. "I know it is," she said. And that was the moment it clicked. Not confusion. Not mistake. Intent. She wasn't trying to understand. She was trying to claim. The sirens were close now, red and blue reflections starting to ripple across the windows, washing over the porch in pulses of color. I took one more step back, lifted my hands slightly where they could be seen, and waited. Because I'd learned something working cases like this. You don't win these situations by talking louder. You win them by letting the truth arrive on paper, in order, at the right time. And as the first cruiser turned onto the street, tires crunching softly against the curb, I realized something else. She thought she had just called for help. What she actually did was start a record. The first thing people get wrong about situations like that is thinking it starts with a single crazy moment, like it just appears out of nowhere, fully formed, loud and obvious. But it never does. It builds slowly, quietly, in small things you almost ignore because you do not want trouble, because you tell yourself it is not worth it, because you just want to live your life and go to sleep at a reasonable hour without wondering who is watching your front door. And if I am being honest, I saw the early signs and I let them slide. I had only moved back into the house full-time about 6 weeks earlier, after my mother passed, and the place still felt like hers more than mine, like I was borrowing it instead of owning it. Every cabinet still organized her way, every drawer holding things I had not had the heart to throw out, the faint smell of her coffee still lingering in the mornings if I woke up early enough. It is a small place by most standards, about 1,800 square feet, single story, built sometime in the late 1980s, nothing fancy. But it is solid, and more importantly, it is ours, paid off, no mortgage, no liens, no drama. Or at least that is what I thought when I signed the final paperwork and had the deed officially recorded under my name. My job does not leave a lot of room for fantasy. I work in housing compliance for the county, which is a polished way of saying I deal with disputes people would rather ignore until they explode, ownership issues, tenant rights, code enforcement, paperwork that decides who gets to stay and who has to leave. So I know what clean title looks like. I know what real authority sounds like, and I know how often people fake both. That is why the first time I met her stuck with me, even though at the time I could not quite explain why. It was a Saturday morning, maybe 9 o'clock. I was out front dragging the trash bin back up the driveway, still half asleep, wearing that same red and black flannel I always throw on when I do not feel like thinking about clothes. And I heard heels behind me. Sharp, deliberate, not the kind of sound you hear in a quiet neighborhood unless someone wants to be noticed. "You must be the new owner," she said, and when I turned around there she was, standing just inside the edge of my lawn like she had measured exactly how far she could step without technically crossing a line. Vanessa Cole introduced herself with a smile that looked practiced, holding a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic like a peace offering, hot pink blazer catching the sunlight, so hard it almost hurt to look at. "I am the HOA president," she added, just a little too quickly, like it mattered more than her name. I remember nodding, taking the cookies because that is what you do, being polite because conflict always costs more than people think it will. "Ethan," I said, and she repeated it back like she was testing how it sounded. Then the question started, casual on the surface, but too precise underneath. "Do you travel for work, Ethan? Are you planning any renovations? Has the property already been updated in the system since the transfer?" She said it like small talk, but my brain flagged every word. People who actually know how property records work do not ask like that. They do not need to. I kept my answers short, nothing she could twist, nothing she could build on. "I am here most of the time," I said. "No major changes planned. Everything is already handled." She smiled again, but this time it tightened just a little at the corners, like something did not line up the way she expected. "Well," she said, glancing past me at the house, not at me anymore. "We like to keep things consistent around here." Consistent. Another word that sounds harmless until you hear how it is used. Over the next couple of weeks, she made sure I heard it a lot. A note about my trash can being out 15 minutes past pickup. A reminder about exterior lighting brightness. A comment about how the porch railing might not meet updated community standards, even though it had been there for decades. None of it serious on its own. All of it just enough to establish a pattern. And then came the part most people miss when they are in it. The conversations that do not happen to your face. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 houses down mentioned one afternoon, in that careful way people use when they do not want to get involved, that Vanessa had been asking around about my place, saying things like the property might still be in transition, that sometimes estates take time to settle, that the county can step in if no one is actively maintaining ownership. I remember the exact feeling when I heard that, not anger, not yet, something colder, like the moment you realize a story is being written about you and you did not get a say in the first chapter. That is when I started paying attention, not reacting, just observing, saving emails, taking photos of every notice, logging dates, because I have seen how this goes when no one keeps track. People do not lose control of their property overnight. They lose it in pieces, one assumption at a time, until suddenly someone else is standing on their porch telling them they do not belong. And by the time the sirens showed up that night, that story she was trying to build, it was already in motion. She just needed one moment to make it feel real. The thing about someone like Vanessa is she does not rush, she layers, she tests how far she can push without resistance. And when she does not get any pushback, she takes that silence and treats it like permission. And that is exactly what happened next, because about a week after Mrs. Alvarez mentioned those quiet rumors, I came home to something that did not look like a big deal unless you knew what you were looking at. It was a standard envelope, no stamp, no return address, just my name written in clean, careful handwriting, slipped halfway under my front door like it belonged there. The paper felt new, too crisp, like it had come straight out of a printer that same day, and the smell of fresh ink hit me the second I unfolded it. At a glance, it looked official, the kind of document that makes people stop reading halfway through because the formatting alone convinces them it must be real. But I have spent years looking at real documents, and this was not one of them. The header was wrong. Close, but not correct. The spacing was off by just enough to bother anyone who has ever worked with actual county templates, and the language tried too hard, like someone who learned legal terms from watching other people use them instead of understanding what they meant. It said the property was under administrative review due to ownership transition irregularities, that temporary oversight could be assigned to ensure community compliance, and that access might be restricted pending verification. It never said who issued it. It never listed a case number that matched anything in the system. It just existed, floating in that gray space where people get scared because they do not know what is real and what is not. I stood there in my own hallway, the hum of the refrigerator behind me, the faint creak of the house settling like it always did at night, and I read it twice, then a third time, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to understand exactly how it was supposed to work on someone who did. Okay, I said out loud, not to anyone, just to break the silence, and I folded it back up carefully instead of crumpling it, because evidence is only useful if you treat it like it matters from the beginning. That was the moment I stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. Not angry, not yet, just clear. The next morning I checked the county recorder database from my laptop, same system I use at work, typed in my address, pulled up the full chain of title, every transfer, every recording, every detail exactly where it should be, clean and simple, my name sitting right there at the top with a timestamp from 3 weeks earlier. No flags, no reviews, no pending actions, nothing even close to what that paper suggested. I took screenshots anyway, saved them to a folder, labeled it with the date, because documentation is not about proving something to yourself, it is about proving it to someone else later when it actually counts. Over the next few days, I noticed more small shifts, things most people would write off as coincidence. A neighbor who used to wave stopped making eye contact. Another one asked, too casually, "Hey, everything all right with your place?" Like they already expected the answer to be no. And then there was the lock. It was a side gate, nothing dramatic, just a narrow path that runs along the house to the backyard. The kind of thing you barely think about, because it has always been there. Same latch, same simple deadbolt, but one evening I reached for it, and it did not turn. The metal felt wrong under my fingers, smoother, newer, and when I looked closer I saw it had been replaced. Not broken, not forced. Replaced. Clean installation. Professional. I stepped back and just stared at it for a second, the evening light stretching long shadows across the yard, the distant sound of a lawn mower fading somewhere down the street, and that same quiet feeling settled in again. Not panic, not confusion, just recognition. This was not random. This was a process. I walked back inside, pulled up the camera feed on my phone, and scrolled back through the previous afternoon until I found it. There she was, standing exactly where I was now, that same bright pink jacket impossible to miss, talking to a guy with a toolbox who looked like he had been told a simple story and believed it without question. I could not hear the audio, but I did not need to. I could see her gesture toward the gate, see him nod, see the old lock come off and the new one go on like it was the most normal thing in the world. I watched it twice, then once more, letting every detail settle into place. "You really think this works?" I said quietly, more to the screen than to her, and I realized something important right then. She was not trying to break in. She was trying to redefine what ownership looked like in front of everyone else. Because if enough people believe you have control, eventually they stop questioning whether you actually do. I locked my front door, set my keys on the counter, and opened a new folder on my computer. I named it with her last name. And that is when this stopped being something happening to me and started becoming something I was going to finish. I did not confront her the next day, and that was deliberate, because the fastest way to lose control in a situation like that is to react before you understand the full shape of what you were dealing with. And I had a pretty good idea already that this was not just about a lock or a fake notice. This was about positioning, about control, about making something false feel normal long enough that no one questioned it anymore. So instead of knocking on her door or sending some angry message that would go nowhere, I went to work the same way I always do when a case starts to feel off. I built a timeline. I pulled every email she had sent since the day we met, saved copies, printed them out, laid them across my kitchen table in order, the overhead light casting that soft yellow glow that made the whole thing feel more serious than it looked. The language changed over time, and that was the key. Early on it was friendly, suggestions, reminders, phrases like just helping keep the neighborhood consistent. Then it shifted, became more formal, more authoritative, words like compliance, review, community standards, and finally it crossed into something else entirely, statements that implied authority she did not actually have, references to oversight, to restrictions, to processes that did not exist. I circled those lines with a pen, slow and careful, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. She was not just making things up randomly. She was building a narrative step by step, introducing the idea that she had a role in deciding what happened to my property, repeating it just enough that it started to sound familiar. And familiar is dangerous because people trust what they have heard before even if it is not true. Around noon that day, I drove down to the county office, not because I needed confirmation, I already had that, but because I wanted a clean, certified copy of my deed and the official property record, something stamped, something undeniable, something that would not leave room for interpretation later. The clerk behind the counter recognized me, gave me that half smile people give when they see you outside your usual context. "What are you doing on this side of things?" she asked. "Just covering my bases," I said, and she nodded like she understood more than I said out loud. Paper slid across. The counter, heavy stock, embossed seal, the kind of document that does not argue, it just states. I drove home with it on the passenger seat, sunlight hitting it just right, so the lettering caught the light every time I turned. That is the thing about real documentation. It does not need to be loud. It just needs to exist. When I got back, I did something most people skip. I walked the perimeter of my own property slowly, like I was seeing it for the first time, checking not just the obvious things but the small ones, the side gate, the fence line, the mailbox, the corners where boundaries meet and get blurry if you are not paying attention. And that is when I noticed the second piece. A small laminated tag attached near the latch of the side gate, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. White background, black text, clean font, and at the top it read temporary access control in neat, centered letters. No logo, no issuing authority, just a phone number printed underneath. I stood there for a long second, the afternoon sun warm on my back, the smell of someone grilling drifting faintly from down the street, and I let that sink in. This was not just about convincing me. This was about convincing everyone else. Anyone who walked past, anyone who glanced over, anyone who saw that tag and thought, "Oh, something official must be going on here." I pulled my phone out, took photos from every angle, close up, wide shot, context. Then I did something simple. I dialed the number. It rang twice before someone picked up. Property services, a man answered, voice flat, routine. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I am calling about a tag placed on my gate this morning." There was a pause, papers shuffling on the other end. "Address?" he asked. I gave it to him. Another pause, longer this time. "We were told the property owner requested temporary access control," he said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "That is interesting," I replied, "because I am the property owner, and I did not request anything." Silence again, heavier now. "We just follow the work order," he said finally. "Who placed it?" I asked. Another hesitation. Then he said a name I already knew. "Vanessa." He did not say her last name, but he did not need to. I thanked him, ended the call, and stood there a moment longer, the small plastic tag swinging slightly in the breeze like it belonged there. That was the point where any doubt disappeared completely. This was not confusion. This was not overstepping. This was a coordinated attempt to create the appearance of authority where none existed. I reached up, removed the tag carefully, slipped it into my pocket instead of throwing it away, because like everything else, it was not trash, it was evidence. And as I walked back toward the house, keys in my hand, the same keys she would later demand from me like she had a right to them, I understood exactly what she was trying to do. She was not just telling a story. She was trying to make the entire neighborhood believe it. I did not take that tag off because I was angry. I took it off because I understood exactly what it was designed to do, and leaving it there would have meant agreeing to a story I never signed up for. So I placed it on my kitchen counter next to the other documents, lined up neatly like pieces of something that was finally starting to show its full shape. And then I waited. Because if there is one thing I have learned from handling cases like this, it is that people who build false authority do not stop when you ignore them. They escalate when you do not play along. It took less than 48 hours. The next email came in just after 6 in the morning, subject line flagged as urgent, like that word alone could make it true. I opened it standing in my kitchen, coffee still too hot to drink, the quiet hum of the house filling the space around me. The message was longer this time, more formal, and it referenced the same language from that fake notice, administrative review, temporary restrictions, community compliance, but now it added something new, access requirements. It stated that for verification purposes, I needed to provide a copy of my keys to the HOA for inspection coordination. I actually let out a small breath when I read that. Not surprise, not confusion, just confirmation. There. It was. The real goal. Everything before that had been set up. This was the ask. Provide a copy of your keys. I said it out loud, shaking my head once. Because even after everything, there is a part of you that expects people to stay within some kind of line. I set the mug down, pulled my laptop closer, and started drafting a response. Not emotional, not defensive, just clear. I referenced my ownership record, attached the certified deed, included the official county confirmation, and I wrote one simple sentence at the end. There is no legal basis for any access requirement from the HOA regarding a privately owned property. I hit send and closed the laptop, not because I thought that would end it, but because I knew exactly what would happen next. People like Vanessa do not back down when presented with facts. They reinterpret them. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. Not an email this time, a direct text from a number I did not have saved, but I did not need to guess who it was. We need to resolve this today, the message read. No greeting, no introduction, just urgency. I stared at it for a second, then typed back, there is nothing to resolve. The reply came almost immediately. You are obstructing a compliance process. I could almost hear her voice in the words, controlled, certain, already framing the situation in a way that made her sound like the one following rules. There is no compliance process. I responded. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again, like she was choosing her next move carefully. If you continue to refuse cooperation, further action will be taken. That line was meant to sound like a warning, but to me it sounded like a script, something she had used before, something that had probably worked before. I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, not engaging further, because the moment you start arguing in circles, you give the other person control of the pace, and I was not going to do that. Instead, I went about my day, but I paid attention to everything. The way the street felt a little quieter than usual, the way a couple of neighbors looked away a second too quickly, the way that sense of normal had shifted just enough to notice if you were paying attention. Late that afternoon, I stepped outside to check the mailbox, the sun hanging low, casting that long golden light across the pavement, and I saw her car parked 2 houses down, engine off, windows up, but she was inside, sitting perfectly still like she had been there for a while. I did not walk over. I did not wave. I just took the mail, turned, and walked back inside like I had not seen her at all, because attention is currency in situations like this, and I was not going to spend it. That night, I reviewed everything again, every email, every message, every piece of paper, building something solid out of all of it, something that would not shift no matter how she tried to frame it. And as I set my keys down on the counter before heading to bed, I caught myself looking at them for a second longer than usual, the metal reflecting the light in a way that suddenly felt heavier than it should. Not because they were just keys anymore, but because they had become the thing she wanted, the symbol she thought would make her version of the story real. I turned off the lights, the house settling into its usual quiet, and I remember thinking one simple thing before I went to sleep. She is not going to stop, and neither am I. The next day did not explode the way people expect stories like this to explode. There was no dramatic confrontation in the morning, no shouting across driveways, no sudden resolution, just something quieter, and somehow that made it worse, because when someone does not react the way you expect, it usually means they are adjusting, not retreating. I left the house just after 7, same routine, keys in my hand, coffee in a travel mug, the air still cool before the sun really settled in, and for a second everything felt normal again, like maybe I had overestimated how far she would push it, like maybe the email, the tag, the lock, all of it had been the peak. Then I saw the paper on my windshield. Not tucked under the wiper like a parking ticket, not folded neatly, just placed flat against the glass like it was meant to be seen immediately, impossible to miss. I set my coffee on the roof of the car and picked it up, already knowing what I was going to find before I even read it. Same formatting style as before, same almost off alignment, same attempt at authority without anything real behind it. This one was shorter, more direct. Notice of restricted access pending verification. It stated that unauthorized entry could result in enforcement action, that compliance was required immediately, and that failure to cooperate would escalate the matter to the appropriate authorities. Appropriate authorities. I let that phrase sit in my head for a second, rolling it around like a piece of grit you cannot quite spit out. People who actually work with authority do not use that phrase. They name the agency. They cite the code. They reference something real. This was theater. I looked up from the paper slowly, scanning the street, and there she was again, across the road this time, standing near the sidewalk like she just happened to be there, phone in her hand, posture relaxed but her attention locked on me. She gave a small wave, casual, like this was all perfectly normal. "Morning, Ethan," she called out, voice bright, almost friendly. I walked over, not rushed, not confrontational, just steady, because I wanted this moment clear, simple, on record in my own mind as much as anywhere else. "You left something on my car," I said, holding up the paper. She glanced at it, then back at me, smile still in place. "That is part of the process," she replied. "There is no process," I said. She tilted her head slightly, like she was disappointed more than challenged. "You keep saying that," she said, "but that does not make it true." I let out a small breath, not frustration, just recognition of where this was going. "And putting paper on my car does not make it real," I answered. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, the kind that happens when someone is deciding whether to stay polite or drop the mask. She chose something in between. "Ethan, you are making this harder than it needs to be," she said, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound more serious. "If you would just cooperate, we can clear this up quickly." There it was again. Cooperate. Another word that sounds harmless until you hear how it is used. "There is nothing to clear up," I said. "The property is in my name. The records are clean. You have no authority here." Her smile thinned, just slightly. "Not gone, but strained now." "We will see about that," she replied. Not loud, not dramatic, just confident. And that was the moment I understood something I had not fully admitted yet. She believed this, not in the sense that she thought she was right, but in the sense that she believed she could make it true by pushing hard enough, by being consistent enough, by acting like the system would back her if she just kept moving forward. I nodded once, more to end the conversation than to agree, turned, and walked back to my car, folding the paper and placing it carefully in the glove compartment instead of throwing it away. Evidence. Always evidence. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, still standing there, watching, phone in hand like she was waiting for something else to happen. I drove to work with the radio off, letting the quiet settle, going over everything again, the emails, the tag, the lock, the notice, building it piece by piece into something that would hold up when it mattered. By the time I parked, I had already made a decision. I was done treating this like a misunderstanding. This was intentional, structured, and escalating, which meant the response needed to be just as structured. Not louder, not faster, just smarter. And somewhere in the back of my mind, one thought kept repeating, steady and clear. She said she would escalate. She just had not realized what that really meant yet. By the time I got home that evening, the air felt different, not in some dramatic way, nothing you could point to and say this is where it changed, but enough that I noticed it the second I turned onto my street, like something had already happened and I had just missed it by a few hours. The sun was dropping low, casting that long orange light across the houses, and everything looked normal at first glance. Lawns trimmed, mailboxes lined up, the same quiet rhythm of a neighborhood winding down for the day. But then I saw it, the small cluster of people gathered 2 houses down, standing just close enough together to suggest something was being talked about, but not close enough to make it obvious. Conversation stopped the second my car came into view. Not abruptly, not rude, just paused. That polite kind of silence that tells you everything you need to know without a single word being said. I parked in my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a second longer than usual, hands resting on the wheel, letting the moment settle. Then I stepped out, keys in hand. Same routine, same movements, but now every step felt like it was being observed. I could feel it without looking. The weight of attention. The shift from neighbor to subject. I walked up to my front door, and that is when I saw the second thing. A piece of paper taped directly to the center of the door, not slipped under, not placed gently, but taped flat like a notice you were meant to see before anything else. The tape edges caught the light. Cheap clear plastic already curling slightly at the corners from the heat. I peeled it off slowly, careful not to tear it, and read it right there on the porch. Notice of noncompliance. It claimed I had failed to cooperate with an active community oversight process, that further refusal would result in enforcement measures, and that immediate action was required to avoid escalation. The language had evolved again. Stronger now. More definitive. Less suggestion, more declaration. I exhaled slowly, folding the paper once, then again, the sound of it crisp and sharp in the quiet evening. Of course, I muttered under my breath, not surprised anymore, just confirming what I already knew. I turned, and that is when I saw her. Vanessa was standing across the street again, but this time she was not alone. Two other residents stood near her, both of them looking uncertain, shifting their weight slightly like they were not entirely comfortable being part of whatever this was, but they were there anyway. She caught my eye immediately and gave a small nod, not friendly this time, more like acknowledgement, like we had both stepped into something that was no longer casual. I walked toward her, not fast, not slow, just direct, because avoiding it now would only give her more room to fill the space with whatever version of events she was building. You taped something to my door, I said, holding up the paper. She did not deny it. It is a formal notice, she replied, voice even, controlled, the performance sharpened now that there was an audience. You are currently out of compliance. One of the neighbors shifted beside her, glancing between us like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Out of compliance with what? I asked. The review process, she said, like that answered everything. I let a small silence sit there, just long enough for the gap in that statement to become obvious to anyone actually listening. There is no review process, I said. She stepped forward slightly, closing just a bit of the distance, her tone lowering, but still loud enough for the others to hear. You can keep saying that, Ethan, but refusing to cooperate does not change the situation. I looked at the two people standing with her, then back at her, and for the first time I addressed the room, not just her. Has anyone here seen any official documentation from the county? I asked. Anything with a case number, a department name, anything that actually confirms what she is claiming? There was a pause, the kind that stretches just enough to shift the balance of a conversation. One of them shook his head slightly. The other did not answer at all. Vanessa's expression tightened, just a fraction, but it was there. This is not something we need to debate in the street, she said quickly. It is already being handled. By who? I asked, simple, direct. Another pause. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, recalibrating. Appropriate channels, she said finally. There it was again. The same vague phrase. The same attempt to fill a gap with confidence instead of substance. I nodded once, like I understood, even though I did not agree, and I took a step back. Okay, I said, calm, steady, letting the word land without any edge. Then I will handle it through the same channels. I turned, walked back to my door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and closed it behind me with a quiet click, leaving the paper folded in my hand. The house felt the same as it always did, steady, familiar, but now there was something else layered on top of it. Not fear, not even anger, just clarity. Because outside, she was building a story for everyone else to believe. Inside, I was building something else entirely. And the difference between those two things was about to matter more than she realized. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was worried, but because my brain does not shut off once it locks onto a pattern, and by the time the house settled into that quiet, late-hour stillness, I already knew what the next move needed to be, not louder, not reactive, just precise. I got up before sunrise, the sky still that dull gray blue, and the air carried that cool edge that disappears once the day starts moving. Coffee brewed in the background, steady drip, while I sat at the kitchen table with everything spread out again. The emails, the notices, the photos, the screenshots, the small laminated tag now sitting in the center like a piece of the whole puzzle. I opened my laptop and started building something different, not just a record, but a case. Timeline first, exact dates, exact times, every contact, every document, every physical action she had taken, replacing the lock, placing the tag, delivering notices, sending messages. Then I added context, what authority she claimed, what authority actually exists, where those two diverged. Clean, structured, no emotion, just facts lined up in a way that did not need explanation. By the time the sun came up fully, casting that warm light through the kitchen window, I had a file that could stand on its own without me saying a word. I printed it, clipped it, set it beside the certified deed, and for a moment I just sat there, hands resting on the table, looking at it, feeling that quiet shift from reacting to controlling. Around 9 o'clock, I made 2 calls. The first was to the county office, not my department, but records verification, the kind of call that gets logged and timestamped whether anyone realizes it matters or not. I confirmed again that there was no active review, no administrative hold, no pending action on my property. The second call was to the HOA management company listed in the community documents, not Vanessa, not the board, the actual administrative contact. A woman answered, professional, neutral. I gave my name, my address, and then I asked one simple question. Is there any authorized process in place that allows the HOA to request keys or restrict access to a privately owned home? There was a pause, short, then she said, no, absolutely not. I let that sit for a second, then added, and is there any active compliance action against my property? Another pause, longer this time, keyboard clicking faintly in the background. No, she said again. There is nothing on record. I thanked her, ended the call, and added those confirmations to the file. Documentation is not about winning an argument. It is about removing the argument entirely. By mid-afternoon, I left the house again, not in a rush, not trying to avoid anyone, just moving through the day the same way I always do. Because consistency matters, it tells people you are not the one creating the disruption. When I got back, the street felt different again, but this time it was sharper, more focused, like something had been building all day and was about to settle somewhere. I saw her before she saw me, standing near the entrance of the neighborhood with another resident, talking, gesturing slightly, her posture confident, controlled, like she was still holding the narrative together. I parked, stepped out, and walked toward the house, but this time I did not go straight to the door. I stopped halfway up the driveway, set my keys down on the hood of the car, and turned toward her. Not confrontational, not aggressive, just present. She noticed immediately. Of course she did. She said something to the person next to her, then started walking over, heels clicking against the pavement, that same steady rhythm I had heard the first day we met. We need to resolve this, she said before she even reached me, skipping any kind of greeting now. I nodded once, slow, deliberate. We do, I replied. There was a slight shift in her expression, something like anticipation, like she thought this was the moment I was going to give in, hand over the keys, play the role she had been building for me. Then let us handle it properly, she said. I reached into my car, picked up the folder, and held it out slightly, not offering it, just making it visible. That is exactly what I am doing, I said. She glanced at it, then back at me, her confidence flickering for just a fraction of a second, not gone, but interrupted. What is that? She asked. Everything, I answered simply. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. The air between us shifted right then, subtle but real, like something had moved from one side of the scale to the other. Because for the first time, this was not just her story anymore. It was a record, and records do not change just because someone says they should. The moment she saw that folder in my hand, something shifted in her, not obvious, not enough for anyone else standing nearby to catch it. But I saw it because I had been watching for it. That tiny hesitation that happens when confidence runs into something solid, something it cannot just talk over. You are overcomplicating this, she said, folding her arms slightly, trying to pull the conversation back into something she could control. I shook my head once, calm, steady. No, I said, I am clarifying it. There was a difference, and for the first time, she knew I knew it. She glanced toward the other resident standing a few steps behind her, like she wanted reinforcement, but all she got was silence, that same careful distance people keep when they are not sure which side they are standing on anymore. I stepped forward just enough to close the space between us, not aggressive, just direct, and I opened the folder, flipping it toward her so she could see the first page, clean, structured, timestamps aligned, documentation laid out in a way that did not invite debate. You said there is a review process, I said, voice even. There is not. I verified that with the county this morning. Log call. Recorded confirmation. I turned one page. You said there are compliance requirements. There are not. I verified that with your own management company. They confirmed no action, no authority, no request. Another page. You placed a lock on my property through a third party under false authorization. I have the footage. I have the vendor confirmation. I have the work order tied back to your name. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I let each piece land the way it was supposed to, because truth does not need speed, it needs clarity. Her expression tightened, just a fraction more now, the edges of that practiced composure starting to show strain. This is not how this works, she said, but the confidence was thinner this time. I closed the folder halfway, not hiding it, just signaling that I did not need to keep proving the same point. You are right, I said. This is not how it works. That is exactly the problem. The street had gone quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one felt different, heavier, like people were actually listening now, not just watching. I could feel it in the stillness, in the way no one moved to interrupt, no one tried to redirect the moment. Vanessa shifted her weight, just slightly, and for the first time since all of this started, she did not have a line ready. You cannot just ignore the HOA, she said finally, reaching for something familiar. I am not ignoring the HOA, I replied. I am ignoring claims that do not exist within it. That landed harder than anything else, because it separated the idea from the person, the structure from the misuse of it. Another small pause stretched out, and I could see it happening in real time. The story she had been building losing shape, losing certainty, not collapsing all at once, but slipping, piece by piece. I picked up my keys from the hood of the car, the same keys she had tried to turn into something symbolic, something she could control, and I held them loosely in my hand, not as a statement, just as fact. You asked for these, I said, glancing at them briefly, then back at her. There is no scenario where that request is valid. Her jaw tightened, and for a second I thought she might try to push again, double down, escalate the way she had been doing from the start, but she did not. Not this time. Because this time, it was not just me she was speaking to. It was a record. It was a timeline. It was something that did not change based on who sounded more certain in the moment. She exhaled, small, controlled, and stepped back half a pace, just enough that it broke the line she had been holding this entire time. We will review this internally, she said, defaulting to something vague again, but it did not carry the same weight anymore. I nodded once. You should, I replied. I did not say anything else. I did not need to. I turned, walked back to my front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The familiar click of the lock sounding exactly the same as it always had, steady, real, unchanged by anything that had been said outside. The house felt the same, the air still, the quiet settling back into place, but now there was something else layered into it. Not tension, not uncertainty, just resolution. I set the folder down on the kitchen table, the papers still aligned, still intact, and I placed my keys beside it, metal against wood, a small, simple sound that carried more weight than anything she had said. Because in the end, that was the difference. She tried to make something true by saying it often enough. I made something undeniable by proving it once. And out there, just beyond the walls, the version of the story she had been telling finally ran out of space to exist.